Welcome to Drive Time Dystopia, where the future is broken, the system is watching, and survival always comes at a cost. Here you'll find dystopian worlds, fractured societies, impossible choices, and the people forced to endure them. So settle in, keep your eyes on the road if you're driving, and step into the dark. Your story begins now.
Obedient, Episode 2, Chapter 1, 5 Minutes to Curfew. The tram moved with a kind of quiet confidence that made it easy to forget it was ever at risk of stopping. Jackson had always trusted that about the system, not because it comforted him, but because it removed the need for thought. The rails hummed beneath his feet in a steady, regulated frequency. The lighting inside the carriage balanced to eliminate contrast. Every surface aligned into a kind of engineered calm that discouraged attention. People existed within it the same way, not interacting, not withdrawing, just present, contained, compliant. No one smiled, no one frowned, no one risked expression that might register as deviation. Above the doors, the display flickered once, then resolved, curfew in 0 hours, 5 minutes, 0 seconds. The countdown began immediately. Jackson didn't look directly at it. He didn't need to. The presence of time was something you felt more than observed, a constant pressure moving forward, whether acknowledged or not. He shifted his arm slightly, just enough to catch the faint glow beneath his skin. The chrono-chip was stable, steady, counting down. That was all that mattered. Outside, the city was already closing, shutters lowering, lighting cooling, pedestrians adjusting pace with subtle precision, every movement aligning toward containment before the final minute expired. This was how it worked. It had always worked this way. The tram slowed at the next station. Passengers stood in quiet synchronization, exiting without disruption. The doors closed, the tram continued. Jackson remained seated. 2 stops, plenty of time. The lights flickered. It was brief, but enough. The hum beneath his feet shifted, barely perceptible, but wrong. The overhead display updated. Curfew in 0 hours, 3 minutes, 48 seconds. The tram slowed again. This time, there was no station. The windows showed only maintenance walls sliding past in dim repetition. Then the tram stopped. Not gradually, not cleanly. It settled into stillness with a faint mechanical shudder that didn't belong. No announcement followed. Silence held. Then the display changed. Transit interruption detected. Please remain calm. The doors unlocked. No one moved. Jackson stood first. Because waiting wasn't a solution. Because the system didn't account for hesitation. Because curfew didn't adjust for failure. He stepped onto the trackside path. Cold air met him immediately, carrying dust and machine heat. Behind him, others followed. The display inside the tram continued counting down. 0 hours, 1 minute, 41 seconds. The corridor stretched ahead, segmented by dim maintenance lights, each section repeating into distance. No instructions, no guidance, just space. Someone behind him whispered, "We should move." Jackson didn't turn. He was already calculating. Distance, time, pace. It didn't work. He started walking anyway, because standing still wasn't an option. Because the system would not correct this in time. Because somewhere above them, curfew was closing. Chapter 2, Silent. Jackson walked because he had to, because motion was the only remaining form of control left to him, even as the structure of control itself began to dissolve around him. The corridor stretched in repeating intervals of light and shadow, each section identical, each gap between them just long enough to distort perception. The air cooled with every step, carrying metal, dust, and something faintly electrical. He focused on those details because they belonged to a language he understood. Machines failed in patterns. Systems warned before collapse. Everything here was warning. The city above transitioned into curfew not with sound, but with absence. The distant hum of infrastructure thinned into something sharper, more focused, more aware. The lights changed, not gradually, instantly. Warmth dropped out of the corridor. Shadows hardened. The space became something else. Containment. Jackson stopped. Above him, something moved. Then the drones appeared, silent, precise. A red scan lattice swept through the corridor, passing over bodies like cold static. His chrono-chip flared. Time dropped. Violently. A man behind him broke. Just enough, and the system responded instantly. A single pulse. The man collapsed. No delay, no correction, just removal. Jackson calculated. The scan moved in cycles. There were gaps. Small. Enough. He reached the access panel on instinct, fingers finding the latch without sight. It resisted for one impossible second, then gave. He dropped inside. Darkness closed. Then amber light. A narrow tunnel. The air changed. He turned and heard footsteps, not running, not hiding, approaching. A figure emerged, not neutral, not controlled. Alive. No chrono-chip. Nothing beneath the skin. They stopped in front of him, studying him like something already understood. "You took longer than I thought," they said. Jackson didn't answer. "You're not supposed to be here," he said instead. The figure tilted their head slightly. "No," they said. "You're not supposed to exist." A pause. "My name is Rook." Jackson hesitated. "Jackson?" Rook nodded once, then, "They'll decide what you are soon." A beat. "Or you can come with me." Jackson looked back toward the hatch, then forward, then at his arm. The digits still moved, but something felt wrong. "Where does it go?" he asked. Rook's expression shifted slightly. "Somewhere the system can't count." Jackson stepped forward. Chapter 3. The People After Curfew. Jackson didn't mean to look at his arm again, but the motion happened anyway, small and automatic, like checking a fracture you already knew was there. The glow beneath his skin held steady for a moment, familiar, reassuring. Then the digits shifted, not down, forward. He stopped walking. The number advanced again. Not deduction, not loss, addition. His mind resisted it instantly, searching for error, delay, misread, but the system didn't correct it. "Stop," Rook said quietly. "Don't watch it like that." Jackson didn't look up. "Like what?" A pause. "Like it belongs to you." That didn't make sense. Nothing did. He forced himself to look away, but Rook was already watching him with something worse than curiosity. Recognition. "You saw it," Jackson said. "Yeah," Rook replied. "I saw it." Jackson shook his head. "That's not possible." "No," Rook said. "It isn't." A beat. "It also just happened." Jackson looked again. The digits advanced. Calm, steady, impossible. "What is that?" he asked. Rook stepped closer. "That's what happens when the system stops knowing where you end." The words settled heavily. "You're not being counted anymore." Jackson's breath tightened. "People don't just stop being counted." "No," Rook said. "They get removed." A pause. "Or they slip." The digits advanced again. "Why is it going up?" "It's not," Rook said. "It's not counting time anymore." A beat. it's counting something else. The tunnel widened into something that shouldn't exist. Rooms, people, movement without correction. Voices unflattened, arguments unrestrained. A child laughing without consequence. It wasn't chaos. It was structure without the system. Sustained. Real. Jackson stood at the edge of it, unable to reconcile what he was seeing with what he knew should be possible. Mara approached, checked his pulse, dismissed him just as quickly. The room continued around him, but something had shifted, not just in him, around him. Jackson felt it before anyone spoke. The system. Seren turned to the screens. Feeds shifted. The hatch appeared. A scan grid swept across it. They found something, Seren said. Data flickered. Active, expired, null. All at once. The system stuttered. Then, error. It didn't correct. Jackson felt it then. The scan reaching deeper, passing through the structure. Through him. His chip flared. The digits flickered. Then climbed. He staggered. Rook caught him. The scan stopped. The system withdrew. Silence returned. Serene stared at him. "You're not just off-grid," he said. A pause. "You're breaking the equation." The words settled heavily into the room. Rook stepped forward again. "Right now," they said, "you're still connected." Jackson looked at his arm. The digits climbed. "Silent," Rook said, "means we hide you." A beat. "Gone means we take it out." Jackson didn't respond. "You don't stay in the middle," Rook continued. Jackson looked up. "If I stay silent," he said slowly, "I'm still theirs." No answer. "And if I'm gone?" The sentence didn't finish. It didn't need to. The digits climbed again. Jackson closed his eyes briefly. Felt it. The connection. The pressure. The system still reaching. He opened them. "I don't want it to stay silent." Chapter 4. Gone. They didn't move him far. That was the first thing Jackson noticed, and it unsettled him more than if they had taken him somewhere hidden, sealed, distant from the rest of the underground. Instead, Rook led him only a short distance from the main chamber, down a narrower corridor where the walls closed in slightly and the lighting shifted from uneven amber strips to something more focused, more deliberate, as if this part of the space had been shaped with intention rather than adapted over time. The air here was cleaner, sharper, carrying the faint, sterile edge of alcohol and heat-treated metal beneath the constant background of dust and machinery. A table stood in the center of the room, metal, reinforced, worn at the edges but maintained with care, and beside it, a collection of tools laid out with quiet precision, none of them concealed, none of them disguised as anything other than what they were. Mara was already there, sleeves rolled, hands steady, as if she had been waiting, not for him specifically, but for the decision itself. She didn't greet him, didn't explain. She only looked at Rook once, received the smallest confirmation, and then turned her attention to Jackson in a way that removed everything else from the room. "Sit," she said. Jackson did. Not because he was told to, because there was no version of leaving. The metal surface was colder than he expected, the contact grounding in a way that made everything else feel sharper by contrast. The weight of his arm, the heat beneath the bandage, the faint but constant presence of the digits still moving in a direction they were never meant to move. He became aware of his breathing. Not fast, not panicked, just present in a way it hadn't been before. Each inhale pulling in the sterile edge of the room, each exhale carrying something out of him that didn't return the same. Mara stepped closer and began unwrapping the bandage without asking. Her movements efficient, practiced, not gentle, but not careless either. The kind of precision that didn't allow for hesitation. As the fabric loosened, the skin beneath came into view, angry, torn slightly at the edges where the clamp had tried and failed to take the chip by force. The embedded oval just beneath the surface, faintly visible, faintly glowing, as if aware of being exposed. Jackson looked at it. He couldn't not. "That's the last time you look at it like that," Mara said, not unkindly, but without softness. "After this, it's just damage." He swallowed. "How long does it take?" he asked. Mara didn't look up. "The removal?" "A beat. Not long." "That's not what I meant." She paused then, just for a second, her hands stilling at the edge of his forearm, before continuing. "No," she said. "It isn't." Rook moved into his peripheral vision, not close enough to interfere, but close enough to remain present. "You can still stop," they said, not pushing, not persuading, just placing the option in the space between them like something real, even if it wasn't. Jackson didn't answer. He didn't need to. The decision had already settled into him. Not as confidence, not as certainty, but as absence. There was no version of continuing the way he had been. The system had already lost its hold. This was just the part where he acknowledged it. Mara reached for one of the tools, a narrow instrument designed for precision rather than force, its edge catching the light just enough to define its purpose without dramatizing it. She positioned his arm flat against the table, adjusting it slightly until the angle was correct, her fingers firm against his wrist. "Don't pull away," she said. "It won't help." "I'm not going to—" "Everyone says that." Her tone didn't change. It didn't need to. Jackson fixed his gaze on a point just beyond the table. Somewhere neutral. Somewhere that didn't contain the shape of what was about to happen. He felt the first contact before he understood it. The pressure of the blade against skin. The precise, controlled application of force. Then the break. Not sharp, not sudden. Just the quiet, undeniable separation of surface, giving way. His breath caught, not from pain alone, but from recognition. This was real. This was happening. The system wasn't part of it. Pain followed. Not explosive. Focused. Localized. It moved in clean lines, mapping itself along nerves that had never been asked to process something like this, his body reacting in contained tension, muscles tightening, fingers curling slightly before he forced them still. Mara worked without pause, without commentary, her movements guided by familiarity rather than caution, widening the opening just enough to access the embedded shape beneath. Blood followed, controlled but present, dark against the metal surface, and through it all, the faint glow remained, the chip still active, still transmitting, still counting something that no longer made sense. "Stay with it," Rook said quietly. Jackson didn't respond. He couldn't, because something else had entered the space. Not from outside, from within. The connection. He felt it as Mara's instrument reached deeper, not just the physical contact, but the resistance beneath it, the chip seated where it had always been, integrated enough that removing it required more than extraction. It required separation. The moment the tool made contact with it, the sensation changed. The pain sharpened, then dropped away, replaced by something far worse. A pull, not on his arm, on something else. Something internal, invisible, like tension in a line he had never known was attached. The chrono-chip flared. Heat surged through his arm. The digits. He saw them. He shouldn't have, but he did. They jumped. Not forward, not backward, flickering between states too fast to follow. The room shifted. Sound narrowed. For a moment, everything reduced to a single point of awareness. The contact, the pull, the impossible sense that something above them had noticed, not through sight, not through signal, but through absence, as if the act itself created a gap large enough to register. Mara's voice cut through it. Now, pressure increased. A clean, decisive movement. And then, release. It wasn't dramatic. There was no sudden silence, no visible change in the room, but something stopped. Jackson's body reacted before his mind did, a sharp inhale pulling air into his lungs as if he had been held under something and only just surfaced. The tension vanished, not reduced, gone. The pressure that had existed at the edge of his awareness his entire life, the constant invisible presence of being measured, tracked, reduced, disappeared so completely that for a moment he didn't recognize the absence of it. Mara lifted the chip free. Small, precise, still glowing. She set it aside without ceremony. "It's done," she said. Jackson didn't move, didn't speak, because something else had taken its place. Not relief, not safety. Space. For the first time in his life. Nothing was counting him. Rook stepped closer, their voice quieter than before. "Don't try to stand yet." Jackson looked at his arm. The wound was there. Real. Open. But beneath it, nothing. No glow, no digits, no presence. He felt unanchored, like gravity had shifted slightly and his body hadn't adjusted yet. "Give it a second," Mara said, already working to close the incision with practiced efficiency. "Your body's going to notice before your head does." Jackson let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Above them, the city continued, unchanged, unaware, still counting, still correcting. But down here, for the first time, Jackson wasn't part of it. Chapter 5, After the Count. Jackson didn't understand what was missing at first, and that was what made it worse. He remained seated longer than anyone told him to, his body still angled slightly forward from where the procedure had ended, his arm wrapped again, but lighter now, not physically, not in any measurable way, but in a way that resisted definition. Mara had already stepped away, the tools cleared with the same quiet efficiency they had been introduced. The small glowing chip removed from the table without ceremony, without containment, as if it no longer held any value once separated from him. The room had not changed. The lighting remained steady. The air carried the same sterile edge. Rook was still there, positioned within reach, but not intruding. Everything external was consistent. That was the problem. Because internally, something had stopped. Not gradually, not fading, stopped. Jackson drew a breath and felt it move through him differently, not obstructed, not enhanced, just unobserved. The instinct to check followed immediately, automatic, ingrained deeper than thought. His hand moved toward his arm before he could stop it, fingers pressing lightly against the bandage, searching for something that was no longer there. Not the wound, not the pain, the presence, the constant, invisible pressure that had existed beneath every moment of his life. Subtle enough to ignore, persistent enough to define everything. It had never announced itself. It had never needed to. And now, it was gone. Jackson frowned slightly, not in confusion, but in resistance, like his mind was rejecting the absence the same way it had rejected the anomaly before. He shifted his weight, preparing to stand, and something in his balance failed. Not dramatically, not enough to fall, just enough that his body overcorrected by a fraction, as if the internal calibration he relied on had been offset by something too small to see, but too significant to ignore. Rook's hand hovered near his shoulder, but didn't touch him. "Take it slow," they said. Jackson nodded once, more out of acknowledgement than agreement, and pushed himself upright. The room didn't tilt, it didn't spin, but it didn't settle correctly either. His sense of space felt delayed, like his perception and his movement were no longer perfectly synchronized. He took a step forward, then another, each one slightly more intentional than the last, each requiring a level of awareness he hadn't needed before. "What is this?" he asked. His voice sounded normal. That was worse. Rook watched him closely, not evaluating, not judging, just tracking. "You're noticing it," they said. "That's not an answer." "No," Rook agreed. "It isn't." Jackson stopped moving. The room continued around him. Distant voices, movement in the corridor, the low hum of systems that had nothing to do with the city above. And for the first time since entering the underground, he realized something else. The space didn't feel hidden. It felt separate. Not beneath, not inside. Outside. He turned his head slightly, focusing on the sound of someone speaking in the adjacent chamber. The words indistinct, but layered with tone, rhythm, something alive. Above ground, sound had always been filtered, flattened, controlled into acceptable ranges. Here, it carried variation, depth. It took effort to process. "What did you do to me?" Jackson asked. Rook didn't react to the wording. "We didn't do anything to you," they said. A beat. "We removed something." Jackson looked at his arm again. The bandage was clean, secure, ordinary. There was nothing there. "That was part of me," he said. Rook tilted their head slightly. "No," they said. "It was part of the system." Jackson didn't respond, because the distinction didn't settle cleanly. His body didn't agree, not yet. He took another step forward, testing it this time, deliberately shifting his weight, adjusting his balance, trying to map the new internal structure he was working with. The delay was still there, subtle, consistent, like something that had been compensating for him his entire life had suddenly stopped without warning. "You feel it," Rook said. Jackson nodded. "It's like..." He stopped, because there wasn't a word for it, not one he had. "Like something is missing," he finished. Rook shook their heads slightly, like something stopped interfering. That landed differently. Jackson looked at them. Rook continued. "You've never existed without it," they said. "Not for a second. Your body, your perception, your sense of timing, everything has been calibrated around that signal." A pause. "Now, it's not there." Jackson absorbed that slowly, not resisting it this time, not fully accepting it either. "So this is permanent," he said. Rook didn't hesitate. "Yes." The word didn't echo. It didn't need to. Jackson exhaled slowly, his chest tightening briefly before releasing again. And for the first time since the procedure, something close to clarity began to form. Not comfort, not control, but orientation. He wasn't broken, he was unmeasured. The realization didn't settle gently. It displaced something, shifted something. He became aware of his heartbeat in a way he hadn't before, not because it was faster, but because nothing was tracking it. Nothing was aligning it to anything external. It simply existed, independent, unobserved, unclaimed. "That's why they remove people," he said quietly. Rook watched him. Not because they break rules, Jackson continued, because they stop fitting. Rook didn't answer. They didn't need to. Jackson looked toward the corridor, toward the space where the rest of the underground continued without him, then back at his arm one last time. Not searching now, not expecting anything, just acknowledging the absence. The digits were gone, not hidden, not silent, gone. He flexed his fingers slowly, testing sensation, control, reality. Everything responded, but differently, like the system had been a layer he had mistaken for structure. And now, it wasn't there. What happens to someone like me? He asked. Rook didn't look away. For the first time since Jackson had met them, the answer came without deflection. They stop being something the system can correct. A beat. Then, and that makes you dangerous. Jackson didn't react immediately. He let the word sit. Not because it surprised him, because it didn't. He turned slightly toward the exit, toward the sound of the underground, toward the space that no longer felt like a hiding place, but something else entirely. Then he took a step forward, and this time there was no delay. Chapter 6. The variable. Jackson didn't notice the shift immediately. Not because it wasn't there, because it didn't behave like anything he had learned to recognize. Above ground, tension had always followed structure. Raised voices flattened into compliance, movement corrected before escalation, conflict absorbed before it could form. Here, it moved differently. It didn't announce itself. It accumulated. It watched. Jackson felt it in fragments at first, small discontinuities in the way people moved around him, conversations that adjusted slightly when he passed, not stopping, not avoiding, just recalibrating. It wasn't fear, not openly, but it wasn't neutrality either. It was something quieter, assessment. He stepped into the main chamber fully now, no longer held at the edges of it, his movement more stable than before. The disorientation from earlier settling into something manageable. The delay was gone. That alone should have reassured him. It didn't, because the absence of delay meant something else had replaced it. Precision. His movements felt sharper now, more exact, as if nothing was compensating anymore, nothing smoothing the edges of his actions into something predictable. When he turned his head, it stopped exactly where he intended. When he stepped, his weight followed cleanly, without adjustment. Nothing buffered him, nothing softened him. He didn't realize how noticeable that was. Until someone else did. "You're moving wrong." The voice came from across the room. Not loud, not confrontational, but direct enough that the surrounding space shifted slightly around it. Jackson turned. A man stood near the far table, arms crossed, posture relaxed in a way that wasn't casual, observant, controlled. Jackson recognized him vaguely, the one from earlier, sorting wire in the side chamber. Taller than most, lean, with the kind of stillness that suggested he didn't waste movement unless it served a purpose. "What does that mean?" Jackson asked. The man didn't answer immediately. He stepped closer instead, closing the distance with deliberate pacing, his eyes fixed not on Jackson's face, but on his body, his movement, the way he stood. "It means," the man said, "you don't adjust." Jackson frowned slightly. "I'm standing." "No," the man said, "you're stabilizing." The distinction didn't land cleanly. Jackson felt irritation rise, not sharp, but present. "That's the same thing." "It's not," the man replied. By now, others were listening. Not openly, but enough. Rook hadn't moved. That was the first warning. The man stopped a few feet in front of Jackson. "Everyone here compensates," he said. "Small corrections, balance shifts, timing adjustments. You don't." A pause. "You just stop." Jackson held his gaze. "I just had surgery." A flicker of something passed through the man's expression. Not agreement, not dismissal, recognition. "Yeah," he said. "That's exactly why." Silence stretched slightly. Then, "You're gone." It wasn't a question. Jackson didn't answer, didn't need to. The man exhaled slowly through his nose, his posture shifting just enough to signal a change, from observation to conclusion. "That's a problem." This time the words didn't stay contained. They moved. A few heads turned more openly now. Someone near the cookers paused. The background rhythm of the room didn't stop, but it thinned. Jackson felt it, the attention, different from before, sharper. "Why?" Jackson asked. The man didn't hesitate. "Because you don't behave predictably anymore." Jackson almost said, "Neither do you." But he stopped, because that wasn't true. Even here, people followed patterns, human ones, messy, variable, but consistent over time. Jackson didn't. Not anymore. "I'm not doing anything," Jackson said. "That's not the point," the man replied, a step closer. "Systems break on people like you." Jackson's jaw tightened slightly. "The system already broke." The man shook his head. "No," he said. "It failed to categorize you." A beat. "That's worse." That landed. Jackson didn't respond immediately, because something in that felt correct, uncomfortable, accurate. Behind the man, someone shifted uneasily. Another voice, quieter. "He's right." Not agreement, concern. Rook finally moved. One step, not between them, just enough to be present. "That's enough, Darren." So now he had a name. Darren didn't look at Rook. Not yet. "He's not stable," Darren said. Rook's voice remained even. "Neither are you." "That's different." "How?" Darren finally turned slightly, just enough to acknowledge Rook without losing Jackson entirely. "I still exist inside the same rules," he said. Jackson felt that, felt the implication of it. Rook didn't respond immediately. Darren continued. "He doesn't." The room held that statement differently, heavier, because it wasn't accusation. It was definition. Jackson looked around, at the people, at the space, at the system they had built underneath the system. And for the first time, he saw it clearly. This place worked because it still followed rules, just different ones. And he didn't. "I'm not trying to disrupt anything," Jackson said. Darren's eyes snapped back to him. "That's the problem," he said again. A pause. "You don't have to." Silence pressed in again, tighter this time. Not fear. Not yet. But something approaching it. Jackson felt it building. Not from above. From here. From them. Rook stepped forward fully now, closing the distance just enough to shift the center of the moment. "He's not a threat," they said. Darren held their gaze. "You don't know that." "I do." "You're hoping." That landed harder than anything else. Even Rook didn't respond immediately. Darren looked back at Jackson. Longer this time, more carefully, like he was trying to see something that hadn't revealed itself yet. Then, what happens when the system finds him again? Jackson answered before Rook could. "It won't." Darren's expression didn't change. "That's not what I asked." A beat. "What happens when it tries?" The question hung there, unanswered, because no one knew. Not Rook, not Seren, not anyone in the room. Jackson felt it settle into him. That gap, that unknown. And for the first time since the removal, he understood something worse than being hunted, being undefined. Darren stepped back slightly, not retreating, repositioning. "We don't keep variables we can't predict," he said. The words weren't directed at Jackson anymore. They were for the room, for the people, for the system beneath the system. And this time, some of them agreed. Not loudly, not openly, but enough. Rook's voice came quieter now, controlled. "He stays." Darren didn't argue immediately. That was worse, because it meant he was considering something else, something longer. "We'll see," he said finally. Then he turned away, but not dismissively, deliberately, like this wasn't over, not even close. Jackson stood where he was. The room slowly resumed, but it didn't return to what it had been. Something had changed, not in the system above, not in the underground, in him. And now, they all knew it.
You've been listening to Drive Time Dystopia. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe, like, and share the channel, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Until next time, keep driving, keep imagining, and stay out of the dark.